And welcome in, Draft Nicks, to another edition of Draft Nation. You know we've got you covered at draftnation.com. You can create a free account today. Stay up to date on everything that's going on with your favorite teams. And it's that time of year where something is going on with seemingly every single team. Trade deadline just passed in the NFL. Major League Baseball offseason about to really get ramped up with league meetings going on. Of course, you've got the NBA and NHL just getting started, but who knows what's happening with some of those teams as they try to decide what their future is going to look like. And that ties directly, especially in the case of the NBA, into college basketball, which just got started. So we thought, why not get somebody in here to talk about what the beginning of this season should look like and how it affects some of those big-time players and programs. National college basketball writer for 24/7 Sports, Isaac Trotter, joins me now. Isaac, thanks so much for making the time today, man. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for having me. Basketball season is here, and now I get to watch 198 games a week, basically, is what it feels like.
Yeah, I mean, how many ways can you split the screen before the pictures start to freeze? That's the question. And we're actually at a time of year where, people think back early to mid-November used to be, and it still is in large part, oh, this team's going to squash that team, and I'll see Longwood the one time I'm going to see them all year until it comes around to the conference tournaments again. But there are some games out there that are worth talking about. We'll get to a couple of them for this coming weekend, one from this past week as well. But let's start with the champs, right? Let's start with UConn trying to do something that has only been done once and by the most legendary program in the game's history. How does Danny Hurley somehow do it? A three-peat when it's only been done by John Wooden at UCLA, about 50 years ago, given that he's lost 4 of his top 5 scorers. Just what does UConn need to do, and how realistic do you think it is for them to consider themselves a team that can do it a third time in a row?
This is going to be an insane challenge because I think everybody is gunning for them. They've spent all offseason watching every ounce of film that you can to try to find the creaks or the cracks in this armor a little bit. But, when you've lost 7 NBA draft picks in the last 2 years combined, that's just nuts. And we've put UConn as a tier 1 national title contender mainly because they've kept this coaching staff intact. Danny Hurley doesn't take the Lakers job. All of his top assistants come back. And so I don't think the talent on this roster is at the level of last year's roster. I just don't. But they still love this group. And I think if you're talking about this, like Hurley and this staff is the best staff in college basketball, they will put their players in position to be successful. And maybe most importantly, they cover up flaws very well. They don't have you like do something that you're not capable of doing. So I think they're going to get the most out of this group. For me, the one angle I'm watching with them early is just rim defense. Last year, Donovan Clingan, when he was on the floor, UConn was just like holding teams. Teams were shooting like 43% at the rim. That's just a nuts number. That's why he's a top 10 draft pick in the lottery and like just a complete, anchor at that back end defensively. I'm not sure they quite have that. So if their rim defense slips down a little bit, I think they could come back to the pack a little bit defensively, but offensively, this system is phenomenal, and they have breakout players galore. Alex Caravan's a familiar name, but Liam McNeely is a 5-star freshman. Salo Ball is a sophomore that I think would have started for a lot of people last year. He just was on a loaded roster, and then Aiden Mahaney, the transfer out of St. Mary's. He was a big-time knockdown, catch-and-shoot three-point shooter. Shot over 40% on those last year, and he's joining a UConn system who created the most open catch-and-shoot threes. So there's a good chance that UConn exceeds expectations just because this staff is awesome.
Yeah, I mean, 4 of their 5 starters shot better than 50% from 3 in their opener against Sacred Heart, including Caravan, who ended up with 20 points, I think it was. Mahaney struggled a little bit in that opener, but it's early. UConn looked good in their opener this week. So certainly, like you said, an uphill climb, but we'll see where it goes from here. One team I want to talk about because I remember us having a conversation. It may have been the day after or a couple of days after the national championship game this past spring. And one of the teams you immediately mentioned worth keeping an eye on going into this season was Gonzaga. Mark Few just continues to produce out there. And they started with a massive blowout win in their opener over what's supposed to be a pretty good Baylor team. Are they really as good as that 38-point victory indicated? Is this a team that will be around Elite Eight Final Four status when we get to the spring?
I think they might be. And that's scary. You never want to have like recency bias after that first game, but like this is a team that I think can win the national championship. I have them rated in my top 5 nationally. They're my national title pick. Like this is the team that I have to win it all. And it's basically, a bet on retention. A lot of these teams, we had 2,000 players enter the transfer portal last cycle. We've had so many freshmen coming in. Gonzaga's ability to keep their top guys in place is just so valuable. Ryan Nembhard is a year 2 transfer breakout. I think he is the best point guard in college basketball. Just set the table point guard. Getting a guy like Graham Ike back for another year is huge. Getting Nolan Hickman back for another year is huge. So when you have your best 3 players that have all been in this system, that's so invaluable when everybody else is trying to kind of figure out some of these things. And that's why I thought the Baylor game was interesting. Baylor's best 3 players, they went out and got in free agency. Gonzaga's best 3 players, they retained. And right. I think that showed a little bit of a difference. So I think Gonzaga is just going to keep getting better and better. My favorite stat with them is 13 of the last 14 years, their pick and roll offense has been like in the 90th percentile or higher nationally. Like every year, their offense is elite. And if I'm going to bank on a team this year, I want the teams that can score at an elite rate. I think Gonzaga might be the top offense in college basketball. And if not, they might just be number 2. Like that feels like the floor for this group offensively.
Not that it's impossible for teams that are trying to gel new players together, especially after they get through the first couple months of the season. But I think that's a great point about the chemistry and the consistency that exists on things as simple as a pick and roll or, a drive and pop, drive and kick, and, teams that know where everybody else on the floor is going to be instinctively because they played with each other for so long.
It's just like also knowing what my job is. Like, hey, I know that Ryan Nembhard is the point guard, and if I'm Nolan Hickman, I'm playing off the ball, and I'm going to get 8 to 9 shots a game. And then Graham Ike, we're got to get him his post ups, and Braden Huff when he checks in, we know what we're doing with him. Everybody kind of knows, like heading into the day, hey, what's my job and how do I do it? And then you can just kind of mix those transfers in because they have good transfers. Michael Ajayi and Khalif Battle are 2 guys that if Gonzaga wins the national title this year, I think those 2 have to be key pieces for them. But when you have all these other pieces in place, hey, Khalif, just come in and go score. Hey, Michael Ajayi, like just come in and guard some people, run the floor. We'll get you some open looks. Like we'll make your life way easier. And if you embrace that, your job here is going to like your numbers are going to look great. Your efficiency is going to look great. And you set yourself up to be drafted because like that, you're playing a role that's pretty similar to what you'd be as an NBA role player.
So let's talk about the impact of the portal on this season in particular, whether it's an individual player who should be a perfect fit in his new home, maybe a program that overhauled their roster due to the advantage of the portal making multiple moves. Where do you suspect some of the biggest portal impacts are going to happen this year?
They're pretty much happening everywhere. I think St. John's is the first one that I would keep an eye on. Kadari Richmond, the ability to poach him from Seton Hall, stealing him from another Big East rival is really important. Seton Hall played really slow last year, and Kadari is like a 6'6", like triple double threat. St. John's plays lightning fast. I think you could see Richmond like put up career best stats just because he gets 6, 7, 8 more possessions per game. Like that stuff type of matters there. So I think St. John's will go as far as its transfer class takes them. I don't want to overlook some of their other pieces. Davon Smith, a transfer out of Utah, is a phenomenal point guard who can really score. I think last year one issue with St. John's that Rick Pitino talked about is like, hey, we're not very laterally quick. This year, they've gotten that. They have a lot of plus athletes. Aaron Scott's another transfer out of North Texas who's going to be just a complete 3-and-D stud. And then another couple that I would look at is just like there's so many new coaches. There's 66 Division I coaching changes in the last carousel. And Kentucky, their ability to completely revamp their roster with the portal is fascinating. And this roster doesn't necessarily look like a typical Kentucky team with like those 5-star freshmen that we kind of got used to during the John Calipari days. This one is old. It's versatile. It's really filled with shooting. And, Mark Pope is super analytical where they want to take a ton of threes. Last year, BYU shot more threes than twos. That was just like the second time a high major team had ever done that in the Ken Pom era. I think Kentucky can do some of those things well because their bigs can pass, their bigs can shoot. They got so many wings. And Jackson Robinson, a transfer out of BYU, Kobe Brea, a transfer out of Dayton, Lamont Butler, transfer out of San Diego State. Like all of these guys are going to be such a huge piece. So it's fun. Like the portal is like, oh, let's build our team from scratch. It feels a little bit like a fantasy team.
Right.
I think you're trying to see those teams that have like a good idea of what we're trying to find. And Kentucky's pieces look really good on paper.
So you got me wanting to go two different directions here now based on what you just said. And one of them is definitely a question about what Calipari does in Fayetteville this year. Let's put that on the back burner and let it simmer for just a second. Let's talk about the other avenue, which is Blue Bloods going out and making their hay in the portal. Kansas goes out and they get AJ Storr from Wisconsin. They get Zeke Mayo from South Dakota State. And the big one, Rylan Griffin from Bama. Has Bill Self, I guess is a sign he's fully embraced the portal now and is committing going forward to, hey, I understand I have to build my team this way.
Absolutely. I think there's a difference between the haves and the have-nots in college basketball. And there's also a difference in the coaches who are like a little bit more old school, like build from retention and recruiting, and the new school coaches. Bill Self, he might be on the older end. He is certainly a new school coach. Like, he is all in on this new era of college basketball and trying to find the best players in free agency. But again, retention matters for Kansas as well. Their ability to get Dajuan Harris back, KJ Adams, and Hunter Dickinson, again, makes the life easier for all these transfers. Because early in the season, don't be surprised if some of these big guys that Kansas has gone into the portal and they will pay up for these guys. They're outbidding a lot of teams to land these players. That doesn't mean they're going to play. And AJ Storr, first game, comes off the bench and plays 15 minutes off the bench in the first game for Kansas because his standard of what Bill Self's standard is, AJ hasn't lived up to it yet. Mm-hmm. He doesn't care how much he pays you in there. As soon as that happens, as soon as practice starts, it's on. And so, like, that's where I think, like, the constant development with that Kansas program is going to be fun because they have not been scared to pay players a lot of money and then not play them a lot of minutes. And I'm fascinated to see how quick some of those newcomers get up to the standard of what Bill Self wants them to play like.
So you mentioned Self embracing this. Just as a quick aside, we saw Tony Bennett step away, kind of almost last minute, I want to say, before the season started. And you get the sense that a lot of it has to do with, I just can't keep up with this level of recruiting. Not that he can't keep up. That's not the right way to put it, but he doesn't want to expend the level of energy recruiting via both the portal as well as high school kids as is necessary now. So just, I don't know if you've rolled this around in the back of your brain or not, Isaac, but what other coaches would you suspect are out there going, it's like the old Danny Glover and Lethal Weapon. I'm too old for this stuff.
No, that's a great question. I think some of the first names that pop up is Tom Izzo at Michigan State. That's one that's kind of repeated. He wants to win really badly, but he wants to win his way. Like, Michigan State doesn't go into the portal and get a bunch of guys. They've gotten one transfer in the last couple cycles combined. Like, that will really move the needle. They gotten a couple other guys, like, they're behind the scenes, but like he's betting on retention. He's gotten guys back. He's really betting on some of these bigs again. Like, hey, like, this is year 3 for some of these guys. We got to get them in shape. And instead of going into the portal to upgrade, he's kind of banking on the players that he's recruited. So Izzo's the first name. I think Ed Cooley is an interesting name to talk about at Georgetown as well. He has a lot of finances there, but that's a Georgetown program that, like, they're a little bit like, he has not hidden the fact that he doesn't like this new era of roster building. Another name that I continually think about, like, are a little bit more on the older school end, is Tad Boyle at Colorado. So those are other questions there, because unfortunately in college basketball, fundraising is a huge part of being a college basketball coach. And you have got to find a way to raise money, whether that's for your NIL collective, in order to hit free agency with the most. Like, this is not, college basketball is kind of shaped into, like, what's the best way? It feels a little bit like professional baseball, where it's like some like finances and payrolls are not the same as others. And so, like, that's where it's like you're trying to build your payroll up so you can go in the portal and make waves. Not every coach wants to do that. And then it makes the other coaches, like a Duke's John Shire, who is like, hey, this new era, I was born in it. I was raised in it. I was born in the darkness. Like, this is, I'm cool with this. Like, this is all I know. Like, I'm ready to rock and roll. That's going to separate some of these programs moving forward.
It's got a very European soccer feel to it at times, so the transfer market, and not just because of the word being used, transfer. Back to Coach Cal. We've let him sit on the back burner and simmer long enough. Look, the guy has always embraced, whether it was recruiting one-and-done freshmen or going out into the portal, he has always embraced the idea of recruiting. It's in his blood. He's a salesman. It's what he's good at. And he reminds me of so many, being from the same area, he reminds me of so many guys from Western PA who are like, hey, come on, we got to do come on, let's go out Friday night. Let's go do this thing. It's going to be awesome. You're going to want to be a part of this. You don't want to miss this. And it's like, can he put that together in Arkansas? And if he can, Isaac, how quickly can he put it together? Because patience is as thin as it's ever been for coaches in college basketball these days.
Especially when you pay up for them. So Arkansas invested a ton of money into this. He doesn't pick Arkansas unless he has a huge NIL budget, which he does. That the chicken money in Arkansas goes very, very far with the Tyson family for that program. So this roster is built to win. There is no such thing as a long rebuild anymore. You don't get 2 years or 3 years to build it up and recruit your guys, and by the time they're juniors, we'll win. No, you have to win right away. This roster's talented. I think I like to split guys up as like, oh, is this like a true five, or is he a stretch five, or top forward, stuff like that, like positionally wise. You could make a case that Arkansas has the best true five in the portal in Jonas Adu out of Tennessee, and the best pure scorer in the portal in Nelly Davis out of Florida Atlantic, who you know really well if you watched the NCAA tournament the last couple of years. Those two guys have to be awesome for them. And then the freshmen. That's one thing. I think freshmen are going to be back in college basketball this year. And Boogie Fland is a freshman who's not in that 5-star ranks, but he's just barely outside of it. He's going to be big for Arkansas. What do we know about Cal? His guards constantly produce. Yeah. Every year he likes to find those guards and give them the keys to the show. Don't be surprised if Boogie Fland is that guy for Kentucky or for Arkansas this year.
So what's crazy, and this leads right into the next question I wanted to ask you, is about freshmen. I just scroll through one random big board that I find. It's very early, obviously, for the 2025 NBA draft. And I scroll through the top 15 names, and 3 or 4 of them are international players. And every other single name, Isaac, is a freshman. I got to get down into the upper teens before I find even a sophomore. Upperclassmen, they don't exist anymore. Because if you're an upperclassman, you would have gone to the draft by now. You wouldn't still be playing. So let's talk about freshmen. And let's start with, I guess, the biggest name of them all, Cooper Flagg, who we've been talking about for, it feels like forever in basketball terms, but who people finally get to see on the floor now at Duke. Is he worth all the hype?
100%. Like, he is an unbelievable prospect. And I think it's going to be one of those things where we know who's a ball knower and who isn't, because you can't box score watch and be like, oh, Cooper Flagg was awesome tonight, because he's going to get his numbers offensively. Mm-hmm. But what he does that doesn't show up in the box score, whether that's his deflections, whether that's his weak side rim protection, which is the pressure that he has, the ability to switch everything. Like, he is the queen on the chessboard defensively. He is an unbelievable defensive prospect. And I'm not a scout yet, but some of my scouting buddies that do this for a living have called Flagg like arguably the best defensive prospect they've ever seen. And that type of stuff that he's able to do defensively is special. And then offensively, his game is just continuing to evolve. We've seen him on the floor with Team USA this summer, ability to get to his offensive game. And he has unbelievable athleticism. Like, this is not a white kid that you're going to be like, oh, he's sneaky athletic. Like, no. This is 99th percentile athleticism that he has. So I think he is going to put on a show. I don't think he's going to be Duke's leading scorer this year. That's actually Con Knippel, the other 5-star freshman that Duke has added, who I think is a complete stud. But I think Flagg is just going to be the most impactful player on the floor. I don't think I'd pick him for National Player of the Year. I understand why he's favorited in some of those markets if you're looking at it from a betting perspective, but he's going to be an awesome player. He's a first-round pick, and he's going to be the number 1 pick in the draft next year.
John Paxson somewhere just had his ears ring when you mentioned unathletic white guards, and now he's going to go all MJ Last Dance on you. And I took that personally. Let's talk about the rest of the freshmen because they're all, if they're any good, they're all draft prospects. Who's maybe the Bub Carrington or the Keyshawn George or the unheralded freshman right now who come March, April, and then into the draft cycle, we will be talking about that much more?
LeBaron Philon from Alabama. He is a stud. He is not a 5-star. He was kind of ranked closer to the 40s or mid-30s and 40s in the recruiting rankings just because this class is awesome. There's so many guys that I think in other classes would have been 5-star prospects. Philon is the real deal. Defensively, he's awesome. Offensively, we've seen his ability for this Alabama team that I think could win the national title this year, just to get the ball in the right spots. Mark Sears comes back, and everyone wants to talk about Sears, but they lost Aaron Estrada last year, who was kind of their set-the-table point guard who could get Sears some great shots. And I think Philon's going to step into that role as well. So he had a game, like in his first game, in the first 15 minutes, he had scored 8 points, had 5 assists, 3 steals, 2 blocks, and 1 turnover. And that's the type of impact that Philon's going to have. He's 6'4", he's 180 pounds, but you watch him and you're like, man, he just gets it. He looks so smart, and he is one of those type of players that I want to bet on, because there's high feel. He could shoot it a little bit. He can pass it. He can play defense. He kind of just does everything well. And, I expect him, honestly, to be a first-round pick. And I wouldn't be surprised at all if he's a one and done this year. And I don't think a lot of people were saying that a couple months ago.
So we've got the first full weekend kind of laid out in front of us now, and some interesting matchups, right? Baylor gets an opportunity to try to bounce back, but on the road against the aforementioned Calipari. Auburn and Houston is a really interesting one. Those are both on Saturday night. The crown jewel of the weekend, though, in the early part of the season, probably UNC at Allen Fieldhouse, and Kansas on Friday night. Just this weekend in general, who or what are you most excited to watch for?
Kansas UNC is going to be awesome. I think a couple angles to watch in that game. Rylan Griffin last year, RJ Davis had his worst game of the season against North Carolina. Rylan Griffin was his primary defender when he was at Alabama. And so now he transfers to Kansas and figures to get a rematch in that one-on-one matchup. So I'm looking at that. And then inside, Kansas's raw size is a pretty big deal. Hunter Dickinson is 7'2" and a legit 240. He's got bricks at his britches. Meanwhile, UNC is a little bit slender in the front court. So this is a big test for a UNC front court that's a little bit, unproven. And a lot of people have questions about them, and we'll see, kind of what that is. And then Houston, Auburn, that could be a thing we see on that first Monday in April. That could be a national championship type of matchup. Both of those teams on KenPom, Houston's number 1, Auburn is number 2, after they just absolutely eviscerated a very, very good Vermont team in their first game of the season. So I think both of those two teams are 2 of the most physical teams. If you like watching football on a basketball court, that's the game to watch, because they are going to bludgeon each other. So that'll be a big one. And then the other underrated game too this weekend on Sunday is Wake Forest against Michigan. Michigan looks vastly, vastly improved. Juwan Howard's gone. They go get Dusty May, the star coach from Florida Atlantic, who took them to the Final Four. Getting him has been huge. That roster is another one of those, hey, it's transfer heavy, but a lot of these pieces make a lot of sense. They can really pass it. They can really shoot it. They have a lot of skill and size. I think Michigan's kind of a dark horse to potentially win the Big Ten, and they're going to kind of the smoke on them is going to really evaporate very quickly if they beat a Wake Forest team that's really good too. With Hunter Salas back, Wake Forest has had a long stretch where they haven't made the NCAA tournament. That team's a tournament team this year, and could be a team that gives Duke and North Carolina a run to win the ACC.
Real quick before we let you run, any final names you want to throw out there for the Draft Knicks who maybe maybe they're a fan of an NBA team that they know is going to be in the lottery next year? Any other teams that are players, that are on your radar that maybe we haven't mentioned yet, you're going to be keeping an especially close eye on these first couple months of the season?
Well, if you like NBA draft prospects, watch a lot of Rutgers and watch a lot of Illinois. Rutgers is the super popular one with Dylan Harper and Ace Bailey, but Illinois is a sneaky one as well. They have Kasparis Yakishonis, a transfer from, or not a transfer, sorry, I get stuck in transfer world, but he is a freshman out of Lithuania who is a stud. Really high feel, 6'6", can really pass it. He loves the Luka Doncic, where he gets in the middle of the lane, he jumps in the floor, you're pretending he's going to shoot. Every defender jumps with him. Then he comes down a 2-hand dart pass. That's one of his favorite plays. And then Will Riley is the other one to watch there. He's a reclass kid, but he's 18 already, so that age isn't a big deal. But in his first game, he went for 30 off the bench in 25 minutes with some absolutely absurd shot making. So I think freshmen in college basketball are back. And if you like the NBA draft, this draft is going to be awesome, because it's not just at the top. There are freshmen galore that I think are going to be really, really good. Derek Queen is another one at Maryland. BJ Edgecombe at Baylor. He just baptized Mark Few's son at the end of that game too. Igor Demon at BYU, another international kid. This class is really, really fun. So if you like the NBA draft, I think college basketball is going to give you a lot of appointment television all year long.
Isaac, great stuff as always. Love catching up with you. We'll have to do it again soon, but make sure to follow him. National college basketball writer for 24/7 Sports. He is plugged in from now through the beginning of April. He'll be all over all of it. Thanks for coming on the clock with us here at Draft Nation.
Thanks for having me. Anytime.